In this video, I'm going to be going over chain concepts, hopefully things that will help you make bigger chains and make good chains more consistently. So first, I'm just going to mention the idea of bases and transitions. So a transition lets you build up a chain onto the next floor, essentially. So you have a base here, and then at this transition, you can build a bigger chain by going on to the next floor, like this. So transition lets you do that. And this specific transition is called GTR, and it's one of the most popular ones, so it's the one I'm going to use the most in examples, but my hope is that everything in this video is going to help you to learn how to use the concepts in whatever chain you want to make, and it doesn't have to be GTR, or it doesn't have to be any specific form. It can just be whatever form you want to use. So I'm going to also show a couple other set forms that people use, like this one, or this is another one. And I'll try to put some links in the description to where you can find more examples of forms, and you can probably find other things, other guides about that. So now, the first concept I'm going to talk about is hanging Puyo. So maybe you're trying to make a very specific form, or it doesn't necessarily have to be specific, but you're trying to make a certain form and you find out there's some Puyo that you put down that you can't use. So in this example, this blue Puyo isn't being used, it's just hanging. So if you realize that it's not being used, you can find a way to use it in your chain later on. So now, if you wanted to use blues, you only need 3 here, because it'll connect with the one that's hanging, and that'll make a chain. And you could even extend even more, like you put greens here, but the blue piece is still hanging, so you could put 3 blues and use it to extend your chain. So if you can recognize what pieces are left over, you can usually find ways to extend your chain by using them. Let's look at another example. So in this chain, the yellow piece is the one that's hanging, and every other piece disappears. So you could find ways to bring that yellow piece into your chain to extend your chain. So you could do this, because you have 1 yellow left over, so you can put 3 more yellows to go with it, and they could be like this as well, things like that. Now for another example, in this one, if you put a green here and a yellow, you'll make your match, but the 1 blue piece will be left over. So you could use it on the back end like this. That's one way you could do it. But you could also use it at the front. So you have a blue piece that's just hanging. So if you were to put 3 blue pieces here, they would fall and connect with the one that's hanging here, and then you could put the green to start the match. And it doesn't have to all be on top. For example, you could put like 1 here, or you could even put it like this, and it would still make the match and use the extra hanging piece there. Now here's the last example for this concept, and in this one, the red piece is the one that's left over. So if you want to use it, you can just put 3 red pieces somewhere, like this would work, or even like something like this would work, or there's a lot of different places where you could put your red pieces. But if you just remember the red piece is the one that's left over, you can remember to put more red pieces back there to connect to it, and then use all your pieces efficiently. Now the next concept I want to talk about is color balance. And the idea here is that you don't want to have what I'm calling a bad balance of colors. So let's say your next piece is a red and a yellow. So you want to complete the transition part, so you put it like this maybe. But this is what I'm calling a bad balance of colors, because you need yellows here to extend your match on the back, and then you need yellows here at the front. So if you draw like greens and blues and reds, it'll become really hard to place pieces efficiently. So there's like one red has to go here, but maybe you draw like blue green and then like green red, and you can try to work around the pieces you draw, but if you're not drawing yellow pieces, it becomes really hard to place pieces efficiently. So that's why I say this is not a very good balance of colors. So if you can see that you need yellows here and you need reds here, one thing you could do, like in this specific example, is you could put the yellow here, and now you have a much better balance because you don't have to use reds here. Technically, in this case, you don't have to use yellows. It's just pretty difficult to use a different color. Like you would have to do something like this. But in the case where you put a red and a yellow, you put a red here, it's a lot easier to use this area without reds. So like if you drew 3 of a color, you could put it like this. If you drew another yellow that wasn't attached to a red, you could put it like this, and then put like that color there instead. So this is easier to use, and the colors are more balanced, where you don't need just a single color. So here's another example of this. Right here, you really want to use blues. You could do something else, like you could do this. It's just not as easy to do and not as efficient usually. But you need blues at the front, and you want blues at the back as well. So that's not a very good balance of colors. So instead, you would probably want to put it like this, or do something that makes it easier and makes it less of a stress if you don't draw the one color, which is blue in this case. There's also a different type of kind of bad balance, where here you might say, well, you can use any color you draw. If you draw blues, you can put them here. If you draw reds, you can put them here. And if you draw greens, you can put them here. But it's difficult because you need like 3 on top, and you don't have any good groups. And if you draw like mixed up colors like blue and green, and then red and blue, it starts to get kind of messy. Of course, you can always find like ways to make your chain work usually. Like if you put this, it's gonna work, but it gets harder to use, and you need more specific colors. So instead, a lot of the times it's better to just try to pick a single 1 or 2 colors instead of like trying to make all different colors possible to use in this space. It's usually better to pick like 1 or 2 like this. So in this case, even though you need red, you only need 1, and you could put it anywhere, and any other color could be attached to it, and you could still make a chain with it. So you could do that, or maybe you have like green, and you only have two reds, but you probably want to use the reds, and then you could use the hanging green somehow if you wanted to. Things like that. Now, it's usually easier to build a bigger chain on top if you build your base more flatly, or I'm calling it convex, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure if convex or concave is better, but I'm going to call it convex, where the edges are higher than the middle. So, like in this case, the right edge and the left edge are kind of high. Like, this is one higher than here, and the left edge is high up, but it's pretty flat in general, and it's convex. And this is easier to use because it's easier to use the space on top to extend your chain. So here's an example of how you might do that. Because it's flatter, it's easier to use, like I was saying. Now on the other hand, if your form was like this, it's the opposite. So if, the first one is what I'm calling convex, then this would be concave, and it'd be really hard to use this form because all of the space over here is hard to use. It's hard to build up here. It's not impossible again, but like you might have to do something like this, and this isn't very efficient because it's all like a simultaneous match instead of a big long match. So here, this space over here is hard to use because the right edge is lower, so it's hard to use the space efficiently. So something you might think about is how could you make it more flat or more convex so that you can use all of your space efficiently. And there's a lot of different ways you could do this. Like you could do it like this. That's one way. You could do it like this. That's another way. And really you can come up with a lot of different ways to do it, but it's just a lot easier to use all of your space efficiently if it's more flat and convex. So by doing something like this, it would be easier to build up on the second floor. Now here's another example. It's hard to use this space over here because it's concave. So while your chain does work, like this would work as a chain, when you're trying to build up to a bigger chain like this, maybe you're going to end up finding that it's pretty hard to use this space over here. And you kind of just like can't do much with it. So now all of this space over here is just getting thrown away essentially, and you're not being efficient with the whole space. So instead, you might want to think about how can you make this more flat and convex. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that in this case too, but I'm going to show a couple. Like you could place it like this instead, and now it's flat. Or you could, depending on the order of colors you draw, you could do it like this. And now it's flat again. Or you could do it like this. Oops. So again, there's a lot of different ways you can do it, but the idea is that you want to find a way to make it so that it's flat and convex instead of concave where everything's in the middle and you can't use the edge as well. And then you can take it too far though. So in this example, everything gets cleared, but even though the edges are higher, they're like they're too high in this case, and it's not flat at all. So it's really hard to use the space in the middle of the screen. And again, it's not necessarily impossible to use it. Like, you could find ways to use it, but usually forms that are like this uneven aren't very easy to work with. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about adjusting for the next piece. So you can see two pieces ahead. So maybe the next piece that's coming is this red yellow, and then the piece after that is a double red. So you're thinking that you want to hurry and complete this transition area quickly. So you put your red and your yellow here. And now you draw a double red, and it's kind of tough to use. Like, this isn't very easy to work with, but you might do it so that your transition is complete. Or you might know, like, that's kind of hard to work with, so you put the reds on the side. But then you run into that color balance problem I was talking about, where now you need reds and yellows. And if you draw blues and greens, it gets really hard to work with because there's just no good spot to put them, really. And like I say a lot, I'm sure you could find ways to work with it. Like, there are things that you can do, but, like, I'll give an example, I guess. Like, here, you could kind of find something that works. I'm sure you could always, like, find ways to deal with whatever colors you get, but it becomes a lot harder, where it's a lot easier if you can keep a good balance of colors. So how does the next piece come into play here? Well, if you see it's a double red, you don't have to put the red yellow here. You can instead put it on the right side. So like this, or like however you want to put it. You can put it like this. And then because it's a double red, you can complete your transition like this. And now you have a much better balance of colors, where there's not one color that you really need or one or two colors that you really need. And there's ways to use whatever color, easier ways to use whatever colors you draw. Now I'll give another example of that. So here you're making GTR on the right side, and you see a double red. So you want to complete your transition, so you could put it like this. And now you have a red and a blue next. So you still want to complete your transition maybe, so you put the blue here and the red here. But it becomes kind of hard to build up. Like, this is hard to work with. Depending on what colors you're drawing, it can be easy. But if you don't draw the right colors, it can be difficult to make your transition onto the second floor. So something you could do instead is, if you see that it's a red-blue in the next, you can instead put the double reds on the side, and then put the red-blue here. And this is much easier to work with. Like, if you draw a blue piece, whatever other color is attached to it, if it's a red or a green or a yellow, it's fine to put it here, because then you can just put all other, like, green pieces over here, or whichever color it is that you need. And it's a lot easier to work with. So if you can adjust, like, realize when the next piece works better than just the next piece, and adjust to that while you're playing, then it can help you make your form better in general, and it'll help you work with the colors you're drawing. Now I'm going to mention about using your tails as a transition. So in this chain, the greens and reds at the end are part of the tail, which is like the pieces that disappear at the end of the chain. So here, they're being used efficiently in the tail, but if you wanted to, you could also use them at the front of the match. So instead, like, do something like this, and then use them to build up higher. And now you have a bigger match. And you do have a red and a green left over in this case, but that's okay, because building another transition helps you a lot in like building even bigger matches more easily. And usually the transition part is the hardest part to build, so it takes a lot of specific pieces a lot of times. So if you can instead use like what you already have, so in this case the reds and the greens here, if you can use those as the transition instead, sometimes that makes it easier to build up higher and build a bigger match in general. Now the last concept I'm going to talk about in this video is what I'm calling top and middle. So essentially switching which piece is the middle and building a bigger chain by using pieces on top and then like putting the correct colors on top. So right now your chain looks like this. Oh, I was gonna clear this. So right now your chain looks like this, and the yellows are in the middle, and these greens are on top. But instead you could switch it so that the greens are in the middle, and then you need a yellow and a green on top. And now you've just extended your chain. But it's the same chain, you just like built on top. And you could do this in exactly the same way as much as you want. So now you extended your chain again in the same way. And you could also use different colors if you get different colors. Like right now the greens are the middle, but if you draw a lot of reds, you can cover the greens with the reds and then put a green on top. So here's another example. The chain looks like this. Right now, the blues are in the middle and the green, a single green is on top. But instead you could change it to like have the greens be in the middle and then put a blue and then another green on top. And the match will still start. But one reason why I chose this as an example is because there's another way to do that, and that's by putting the greens here, and then you still just need a blue and a green on top, and the match will still work. And then when you put it like this, it's flatter and it's easier to build over to this side. And you're using the space on the left edge efficiently, whereas if you put it like like I did the first time, it's harder to use that space on the left edge. And I know I keep saying it, but I'm sure you can always find ways to do it. It's just harder to do it. Oops. So here's an example of how you might use it, but this would be a lot harder and you need like 3 of the same color, something like that. And that didn't even work. I put an extra red. Anyway, I'll move on to the next example here. So here, you're probably going to do your match like this, and everything disappears. But using this idea of like building on top, instead of starting the match with the yellows, or like after the blues going to the yellows, you could go to the greens instead, and then put a yellow and green. And it makes the same match, but there's an extra match in there. And you could take this concept or build on this concept, use a different color maybe. In this case, this isn't a very good way to do it, but you could do it. And that makes the same match again. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. Now, in this example, the base is the same, but the top part is a little bit different. So here's how the chain would probably start. But you could find a lot of different ways to build on top. So you could instead use the greens, and then you could put blues and yellows like this, and a green to build on top. Or you could instead do yellow and blue in the other order to build on top. So there's different ways you could do this, but the idea is that instead of just putting a single reds in between the blues and then blues in between the yellows and having each piece fall one after the other, you could build on top instead. This isn't very efficient, but you could do something like this. Now for the last example, this is something that can be pretty useful in some situations if you use GTR a lot, where here, if you're trying to start your match, it looks like you have to get rid of this garbage piece. So if the pieces you're drawing are red and green and then double red, you might put it like this. And now you just need one more green and one more red, but maybe you put down a whole bunch of pieces and you don't get them, and then it just feels like you got unlucky because you didn't get the right pieces. But actually, with these two pieces, you could start your match. So you could put the red here and a green. So originally, the greens are in the middle and the reds are on top, but you could use the reds as the middle and put a green red on top. So you put your red green like this, and then the double red goes like this, and now you've made your match work anyway, without having to start it in the same way. And then, as always, you can keep going with the same concept, make the upper greens the new middle, and then put green, red, green, red, green, red, on top. One thing to note for this specific use of this is that if you had greens instead of blues here, it wouldn't work, because when you make the reds disappear, the green will connect with these greens as well, and it'll break the match. So it'll only work if this color here doesn't match this color here. Now that's all I have for this current video, but the next video I'm going to make is going to talk more about attacking and defending, and more like battling against someone else in a match, as opposed to just building bigger and better chains. Now building good chains is one part of being able to play well against a different person, against someone else in versus, but there's other parts to that as well, and that's what I'll talk about in the next video.